In discussing Gilbert and Sullivan, we do tend, for convenience sake, to refer to all the operas as Savoy operas. But the pedant, and I think when it comes to Gilbert and Sullivan, a lot of us do have a touch of the pedant, will point out that not till the 6th opera in the series did the Savoy Theater even exist. When D'Oyly Carte began operations, it was the Opera Comique which housed the productions. Now, the Opera Comique, situated in the muddle of streets and alleys later swept away in the building of Kingsway and the Aldwych, wasn't quite the ideal venue for Gilbert and Sullivan, or indeed for anything. One of the actresses who appeared there in the comic operas remembered it with something less than affection.
It was situated in what was then a most unsavoury neighbourhood. The theatre was small, poor, and inconvenient, even according to the standards of those days. It was like a rabbit warren for entrances, having 3 or 4 in as many different streets, and from the principal one, which was in the Strand, there was an excessively long and narrow tunnel to traverse before arriving at the stalls, which would have been an awful place in case of fire or panic.
So it's no wonder that as soon as Carte had made enough money out of the first 5 operettas, he should start building a new home for any others that might follow. And in creating the new Savoy, Carte effected a kind of revolution in theatre-going conventions.
It was the first theatre to have no tipping. You would tip your usher for a program. D'Oyly Carte insisted that the programs be free, but later on he changed his position. He discovered there was a market there, so he would have, say in the later performances, a free program that you didn't pay a tip for, but then one that you would pay a few pence for.
Tell us what it says on some of those early programs of yours about tipping, because if I'm not mistaken, it doesn't just say tipping's not necessary, but it threatens punishments.
Yes, it says the attendant will be dismissed. This occurs in almost all of these early Gilbert and Sullivan programs. It also indicates that the theater is lit by electricity. They were very proud of the electric light. Initially, they could only get it in the audience. Eventually, they had it on the stage, too, within a week of its opening.
And that was the great stroke of theatre in Iolanthe, wasn't it, when the ferries all light up? Was that electric light?
Yes, he used battery packs on each of the ferries.
Very adventurous.
Oh, yes. Well, he was great thinking. They were big as, I can say, an encyclopedia, the batteries. So they had to fit under the costumes. And they would go to the wands and to the headdresses. There was a problem, too, at one point where there was an all-blackout scene, and they wanted to light Sullivan's baton. And so a great amount of effort went into that. And eventually the Siemens company, that make the X-rays today, came up with a baton that had a platinum wire inside of a glass tube that would light up in the dark. I'm glad he wasn't electrocuted by it.
But of course, by the time Iolanthe opened, the Savoy regime was already established. I think it was with the opera before that one in the sequence that the Savoy first took its place in the history of English light music. Patience was the last Gilbert and Sullivan opera not to be unveiled at the Savoy, but it was also the first one to appear there, and that's a contradiction resolved by the fact that it transferred to the Savoy in mid-run. Now, looking back on it, maybe the success of Patience in the commercial theatre was Gilbert's greatest triumph of all, simply because of the uncommercial nature of the opera's theme.
It's incredible that you could write an operetta and have it be successful when you're writing it about aestheticism. If you think about it, that's a very arcane, kind of remote subject.
If you're anxious for to shine in the high aesthetic line as a man of culture rare, you must get aboard the germs of the transcendental terms and plant them everywhere. You must lie upon the daisies and discourse in novel phrases of your complicated state of mind. The meaning doesn't matter if it's only idle chatter of a transcendental kind. And everyone will say, as you walk your mystic way, if this young man expresses himself in terms too deep for me, why, what a very singularly deep young man this deep young man must be.
In the case of Bunthorne and the rest of them, this was patently a reference to the pre-Raphaelites, to John Ruskin, to Whistler, to Wilde. He was genially pillorying very famous people of the day. Now, I don't know what the libel laws were at the time. I suppose they must have been fairly slack. But everybody presumably knew who Gilbert was referring to when he had men with greenery, yellowy attitudes and floppy clothes and attitudinising about the arts.
I think what Gilbert was really writing about was affectation, which is something that we all are affected at times. We all perhaps represent ourselves differently than we really are. And Gilbert was really poking fun at that, but he used this mechanism of aestheticism, this craze that was sweeping England. People did carry lilies around. Not very many people. They probably stood out like the punk rockers today or people that dress in strange clothing. But these people did exist, and they did go around talking about, someone asked, would you like something to eat? And I eat seldom was the reply. That sort of behavior. And so Gilbert grabbed onto this. Again, there was nervousness that this wouldn't play in America, because America clearly was a market for them by this time in the 1880s, and they wanted the American dollar. So this is where D'Oyly Carte sent Oscar Wilde over on a speaking tour, and he was very frank with Wilde. He told Wilde the truth. He said, I'm trying to promote my opera. You are trying to promote your philosophy. Wilde saw no contradiction with this. So he knew that he was going over there as a front man or a huckster. He would show them what this opera is all about. And so Wilde would go into a city, give his lectures, it would be reported in the press what this was all about, and then in would come patients and make fun of it all. So Wilde was very aware of this.
It's clear that when the evil heart alone retains its zest to charm and please its devotees, we now our little rest. We're not quite sure if all we do and hear the English ring, but as far as we can judge, it's something like this sort of thing. You hold yourself like this, you hold yourself like that. By hook and crook, you try to look both angular and flat. We venture to expect that what we recollect, no but a part of true high art will have its due effect. If this is not exactly right, we hope you won't upbraid. You can't get my aesthetic taste like trousers ready-made. True views on where the evil is of crime alone will bring, but as far as we can judge, it's something like this sort of thing. You hold yourself like this, you hold yourself like that. By hook and crook, you try to look both angular and flat. To cultivate the trim, rigidity of limb, you want to get a marionette and form your style on him.
Now, Carte was a little bit worried that the kind of music we just heard might not appeal to American audiences, so he had his wife Helen handle the New York end of the business.
The publicity for Wilde's coming visit to America was not quite the kind to appeal to Oscar's ego. The Sporting Times suggested that Wilde was being sent out as a sort of human sandwich board. They then printed a retraction saying that Richard had decided to use American sandwich men with longer hair. Oscar was slightly sensitive about this, but only slightly. What mollified him, I think, was the fee we were paying him.
I suppose it's true to say, in a way, that he made the lectures so funny and such a success that they became very marketable and very famous in themselves.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know if Wilde gilded the lily, but he said he used to talk to miners and cowboys and they showed a naive interest in the fine arts.
Well, Wilde was a performer. He could entertain a group of people. He could get up in front of them and entertain them all, both with his person and his mannerisms and what he said.
As to what he said, Wilde would appear to have been advertising not so much Patience as himself. On American ceremony.
There is no American ceremony. I've seen only 2 processions here. One was the fire brigade, preceded by the police. The other was the police, preceded by the fire brigade.
On the Niagara Falls.
A vast, unnecessary amount of water going the wrong way. The wonder would be if the water didn't fall. Every American bride is taken there, and the sight of the waterfall must be the earliest, if not the keenest, disappointment in American married life.
On American novels.
I assume that's what's meant when people talk of American dry goods.
On the military ego.
In the South, I found a melancholy tendency to date everything by the late Civil War. How beautiful the moon is tonight, I said to one gentleman. Yes, he said, but you should have seen it before the war. When I got to Texas, I was addressed as captain. In Virginia, I was promoted to colonel, and on arrival at the Mexican border, was made up to full general.
The soldiers of the Queen are in friendly terror, of blood at the sea, they fight them all together. Let every mother sob, prepare to fight and always. The enemy of one, the enemy of always, the enemy of one, the enemy of always. If you want a receipt for that popular mystery known to the world as a heavy dragoon, take all the remarkable people in history, rattle them up to a popular tune. But luck of Lord Nelson on board of the Victory, genius of Bismarck devising a plan, the humor of feeling which sounds contradictory, coolness of Paget about to trepan. The science of Julian, the eminent musical wit of Macaulay, who wrote of Queen Anne, the pathos of Paddy as rendered by Boucicault, style of the Bishop of Sodder and Man, the dash of Adossi, the bastard of quackery, narrative powers of Dickens and Thackeray, Victor Emmanuel, Quixote Peveril, Thomas Aquinas and Douglas Cheveril, Copper and Tennis and Daniel Defoe, Anthony Trollope and Mr. Guizot. All that is beautiful, and them all down in a pelican or crucible, second to Singer and take on the stars, and the heavy dragoon is the best in you. If you want a receipt for this soldier like Paragon, get at the wealth of the Tsar if you can, the family pride of a Spaniard from Aragon, force of Mephisto pronouncing a ban. A smack of Lord Waterford, reckless and rollicky, swagger of Roderick heading his clan, the keen penetration of Paddington Pollocky, grace of an orderly scholarly van, the genius strategic of Caesar or Hannibal, skill of Sir Garnet crushing a cannibal, flavour of Hamlet, the stranger a touch of him, little of Manfred, but not very much of him, Beadle of Burlington, Richardson Shaw, Mr. Micawber and Madame Tussauds. All that is usable, held them all down in a billion in Percival, second to Singer and take on the stars, and the heavy dragoon is the best in you.
There is, it seems to me, some evidence to suggest that Wilde, he didn't actually plagiarise Gilbert afterwards, but he borrowed a lot of his effects. In that play Engaged, Gilbert's stage directions are very significant. They say something like, I cannot impress too strongly on all members of the cast the absolute importance of maintaining earnestness at all times.
Well, I think this is true of all the operettas. And this is one of the problems today, is that your average person who picks up one of those operettas and is going to perform in it, especially, say, in a school where there's no tradition, will want to burlesque or send up the character, will want to play it for what it's worth. And Gilbert repeatedly, and in most of his operettas, admonishes the player, this will only work if you're serious. You are what you are. It is for the audience to laugh, and the audience is to be amused by all this. You can't be amused at yourself. If it's topsy-turvy, if it's bizarre, whatever it is, you must play it straight. And that's the secret, I think, of Gilbert and Sullivan. And I've seen it played where the actor jokes and becomes amused at himself and puts in stage gags and other things which detract from what the Gilbert message is. It is for the audience to laugh, not for the performer.
And this is rooted very closely to this business of Gilbert being the first, I suppose, modern stage manager. A man who was a martinet with the actors, who moved them around like dolls, because he wanted this precise, exact effect, and he didn't want any deviation from it. I think that he wouldn't have been able to have achieved this revolution in comedy playing had he not been this bully and this martinet.
May I remind you, Miss Anderson, that you are supposed to be portraying a modern woman, not a saint in a stained glass window?
Mr. Gilbert, the audience seems to prefer the saint in the window.
The audience doesn't have any idea what my play is about, and neither do you.
No doubt, Mr. Gilbert, you are only able to endure my performance at all because of the way my popularity enhances your royalties.
Perhaps not quite a saint after all, Miss Anderson.
And there was one occasion at rehearsal when the actress Henrietta Hodson fell backwards onto the floor, and Gilbert took full advantage of the event.
Ah, Miss Hodson, I always knew you would make an impression on the stage.
Gilbert was not averse to accepting suggestions from the players, and there are repeated instances in the biographies of all these players. They all wrote biographies. I played in the Gilbert and Sullivan operetta by X. And it's full of anecdotes where someone would suggest something to Gilbert and he with a quip would reject it, but occasionally he would accept it and would employ it. An example is the hornpipe in Ruddigore, where the tenor at that time told Gilbert, he said, after I finish this little song, I think a hornpipe would be great. Gilbert thought about it and wrote it in, and then hired a seaman to come down and teach this actor to do the hornpipe.
I ship, do you see, in a revenue sloop, and off Cape Finisterre steer. A merchantman we see, our Frenchmen going free, so we made for the Monmouthshire, do you see, we made for the Monmouthshire. But she proved to be a frigate, and she armed with her ports and fires with a 32. It come and near, but we answered with a cheer, which paralyzed the party-hoo, do you see? Which paralyzed the party-hoo. Which paralyzed the party-hoo, do you see? Which paralyzed the party-hoo. Then a captain up, and he says he, that chap we need not fear. We can take her if we like, she is certain for the strike, for she's only an Almousseer, do you see? She's only an Almousseer. But to fight a French fella, it's like hitting of a gal. It's a lovely thing for to do. For we with all our faults, why we're sturdy pretty salts, while she's only a poor parley-boo, do you see? While she's only a poor parley-boo. While she's only a poor parley-boo, do you see? While she's only a poor parley-boo. So we up with our helm, and we scuds before the breeze, as we gives a compassionating cheer. Froggy answers with a shout, as he sees us go about, which was grateful of the poor Mousseer, do you see, which was grateful of the poor Mousseer. And I'll wager in their joy they kissed each other's cheek, which is what them foreigners do. And they blessed the lucky stars, we were hardy British tars, who had pity on a poor parley-boo, do you see, who had pity on a poor parley-boo. Who had pity on a poor parley-boo, do you see, who had pity on a poor parley-boo.
Let me talk about Iolanthe for a moment. It seems to me, in a way, to be the most English of all the operas because it's a very close lampoon of Gladstone's 1880 to 1886 cabinet. In the Iolanthe, there is that nightmare song. And a nightmare song is very specific because it's about a chancellor, and the chancellor says something like, "True love, I wander the streets at night, or true love, unrequited, robs me of my sleep." William Ewart Gladstone was Prime Minister at that time. He had been Chancellor, not Lord Chancellor, but Chancellor of the Exchequer. And in the very year that the opera was being written, he'd been in a scandal, not for the first time, of walking the streets of the West End of London after midnight, consorting with prostitutes, who he said he was trying to reform, and probably was. He'd been in trouble with the police over it, and it became an open scandal, and his secretary and the second man in the government tossed a coin to see who was going to tell Gladstone that he must stop doing this. Now, Gladstone goes to see Iolanthe, and he sees this Gilbertian Chancellor delivering this magnificent nightmare song about a Chancellor that's wandering the streets at night because he's looking for love. Now, if I were Gladstone, I would have taken deep offence. But there is a letter, I think it's to Sullivan, not to Gilbert, from Gladstone saying how much he'd enjoyed.
Yes, there is such a letter.
Now, have you got anything to say about Gladstone's bland approval of what must have been a lampoon of himself?
Well, sometimes a lampoon can be taken as a compliment, perhaps a politician being very careful, and Gladstone was a master politician. You certainly don't want to draw attention to the fact that you have found a lot of truth in some lampoon of you. So by taking objection to it, you might give it validity that it doesn't have.
Love unrequited robs me of my rest. Love, hopeless love, my ardent soul encumbers. Love, nightmare-like, lies heavy on me chest and weaves itself into my midnight slumbers. When you're lying awake with a dismal headache and repose is tabooed by anxiety, I conceive you may use any language you choose to indulge in without impropriety. For your brain is on fire, the betlers conspire of usual slumber to plunder you. First your counterpane goes and uncovers your toes, and your sheet slips demurely from under you. Then the blanketing tickles, you feel like mixed pickles, so terribly sharp is the pricking. And you're hot and you cross and you tumble and toss till there's nothing twixt you and the ticking. Then the bedclothes will creep to the ground in a heap, and you pick 'em all up in a tangle. Next your pillow resigns and politely declines to remain at its usual angle. Well, you get some repose in the form of a doze without eyeballs and head ever aching. But you're slumbering in such horrible dreams that you'd very much better be waking. For you dream you are crossing the channel and tossing about in a steamer from Harwich, which is something between a large bathing machine and a very small second-class carriage. And you're giving a treat, penny ice and cold meat, to a party of friends and relations. They're a ravenous horde and they all came on board Wilson Square and South Kensington stations. And bound on that journey you find your attorney who started that morning from Devon. He's a bit undersized and you don't feel surprised when he tells you he's only 11. Well, you're driving like mad with this singular lad. By the ship's now a four-wheeler, and you're playing round games and he calls you bad names when you tell him the ties pay the dealer. But this you can't stand, so you throw up your hand and you find you're as cold as an icicle. In your shirt and your socks, the black silk gold clocks crossing Salisbury Plain on a bicycle. And he and the crew are on bicycles too, which they've somehow or other invested in. And he's telling the tars all the particulars of a company he's interested in. It's a scheme of devices to get at low prices all goods from cough mixtures to cables, which tickle the sailors by treating retailers as though they were all vegetables. You get a good spadesman to plant small tradesmen, first take off his boots with a boot tree, and his legs quick root and his fingers will shoot till they blossom and bud like a fruit tree. From the green gossip tree you get grapes and green pea, cauliflower, pineapple and cranberries, while the pastry cook plant cherry brandy will grant apple puffs and three corners and Banburys. The shares are a penny and ever so many are taken by Rothschild and Baring, and just as a few are allotted to you, you awake with a shudder despairing. You're a regular wreck with a crick in your neck and a one-deer snore for your head's on the floor, and you've needles and pins from your soles, your shins and your flesh is a creep and your leg feels steep, and you're cramping your toes and a fly in your nose, and some fluff in your lung and a feverish tongue and a thirst and intense and a general sense that you haven't been sleeping in clover. But the darkness has passed, and it's daylight at last, and the night has been long, ditto, ditto, my song. And thank goodness they're both of them over.
In the same opera, there is a reference to the Fairy Queen. And 3 or 4 years before, Disraeli had described Queen Victoria as the Fairy Queen. And he says things like, a fat queen is all right in moderation. I mean, he's really poking fun at Victoria. And this seemed to me a very daring thing to do.
Well, it was even more daring because when the peers come out, they have the different orders on, including the Order of the Garter. Later on in Utopia, where Gilbert has a person with an Order of the Garter, and Edward VII took exception to this and asked him to remove it. At that time, though, Gilbert felt he was safe after Iolanthe because he had had a peer come out. He went to a lot of trouble for the peers' costumes in Iolanthe. And when they come out on the stage, if you recall the opening of Iolanthe, it's a woodland scene, it's darkly lit. Sullivan has set it with Wagnerian-type music, with Iolanthe rising up out of the water. And true, there's been fairies there, but the scene is sort of unrelieved. And then all of a sudden come the Tantantara, and in march the peers to this marvelous strident march. And when they come in, it is truly a great stage effect. And having produced a few Gilbert and Sullivan operettas, you stumble through this thing almost blindly, and then you realize what a master craftsman he was in terms of entrance and timing on the stage. Things happen in the Gilbert and Sullivan operettas that keep you interested, and this is one of the really a striking effect when it happens.
Do you think that poking fun at Queen Victoria, which he unquestionably does in Iolanthe, I feel, for instance, that when she finds Private Willis, an attractive man, says, well, there's an attractive chap, but he's a commoner and I can't really look at him too closely, that Gilbert is winking to England regarding Queen Victoria's liaison with John Brown. Do you think this had any connection with the fact that he had to wait an awful long time for his knighthood and never got it under Victoria, whereas Sullivan did? Or do you think that Gilbert's very spiky sense of humour wasn't taken very kindly in establishment circles?
Well, I think he was striking out at the institution of class, because he makes a peer's exalted station available by competitive examination. He's going to really destroy the peerage. He's going to put Strephon in there, who's going to win every vote and every measure. And he deals both with the House of Commons and with the House of Lords in this, and spares no one. So yes, people do feel that to some extent is a parody of Queen Victoria, but it's also a parody, or at least a statement about aging, powerful spinster women who are overweight. Much has been written about Gilbert's cruelty. Sullivan would perhaps take away this cruelty and soften it with his music. And this is a striking effect. The lyric was also always very tough. When you read just the printed word, it comes through very harsh. And yet Sullivan would set these women's song. One thinks of Lady Jane playing the fiddle and singing Gone is the Tapered Waist, a beautiful song. Sheet music people wanted to publish it as a separate sheet, and they went ahead and published it with new lyrics.
By who?
They went out and they had another composer set words to it.
And Gilbert gave permission?
Well, he didn't say anything, but you couldn't. This lyric is awful. It's all the things that happen to you when you grow old. No one would put that on their parlor and sing it, so it was changed into a love song with the same music.
In the twilight of our love, in the darkness falling fast, broken by no gleam above, what must be our thoughts the last? Silent ere we say farewell, pausing ere we turn to part, whilst one wish we dare not tell echoes yet from heart to heart. Saddest of all sad regret, would we two had never met.
Do we know anything about the eventual origins of Gilbert's Nighter, which came very late in his life after Sullivan's death? Because he was a man that had rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, and I suppose somebody must have finally said, oh, well, he's not a bad chap, let's give him a knighthood. And I just wondered if it was the king or the Prime Minister, or whether they wanted to pay tribute to the theatre.
I think after Sullivan died, there was a period of time which he supervised some revivals, but then gradually the Gilbert and Sullivan operas died off. The best thing that Gilbert could do would be to become less public, and he became less public and retreated to his mansion in Harrow Weald. As he did so, I think then people could look upon him more kindly. Edward VII certainly knew Gilbert and had met him, but was a very close friend of Sullivan's. When Gilbert helped the nephew of Sullivan place the monument on the Thames embankment and spoke fondly of Sullivan, I think that this, to some extent, softened the view of him among the upper classes, and he was given a peerage just in the last few years of his life.
Well, at that point, with typical Californian generosity, Tom Herrick's elevated Gilbert a little bit higher than England saw fit. They didn't give him a peerage, it was a mere knighthood. But Gilbert's reaction was characteristic of a professional curmudgeon, obstinately looking a gift horse in the mouth, even in private performance with Mrs. Gilbert.
You will accept?
I've already said as much to the King's Secretary.
Oh, I am glad.
I don't see why. It's easy enough to pick up honours if you care to stoop low enough for them. But I've never gone out of my way to please people of influence.
I don't think it would ever occur to anyone to say you had.
Oh, it's a tiny, twopenny, halfpenny sort of distinction, but I feel I ought not to refuse. Mind you, this indiscriminate flinging about of knighthoods is making me very nervous. It's quite possible they might give one to my butler.
But of course they never did. They gave Gilbert his, though, and he resolutely maintained the proud front of a man condescending to accept a bit of tinsel, not for himself, but on behalf of the members of his profession, very few of whom he hadn't fought with at one time or another.
I attended the investiture at Buckingham Palace, where I was duly tapped on both shoulders by Edward VII. I found myself politely described in the official list as Mr. William Gilbert, playwright, suggesting that my work was analogical to that of a wheelwright, or a millwright, or a wainwright, or a shipwright, I suppose as regards the mechanical character of the process by which our respective results are achieved. There is an excellent word, dramatist, which seems to fit the situation, but it is not applied till we are dead, and then we become dramatists, as oxen, sheep, and pigs are transfigured into beef, mutton, and pork after their demise. We never hear of a novel write, or a picture write, or a poem write. Why a playwright?
Our peerage we've remodeled on an intellectual basis, which certainly is rough on our hereditary races. We're going to remodel it in England. The brewers and the cotton lords no longer seek admission, and literary merit meets with proper recognition. As literary merit does in England. Who knows but we may count among our intellectual chickens, like you an Earl of Thackeray, or perhaps a Duke of Dickens. Lord Filders and Viscount Miller, when they come, we'll welcome sweetly. In short, this happy country has been anglicized completely, completely, completely. It really is surprising what the mother and precisely made up of the bucket jumps by the motherland. In an enterprising woman, she is independent woman, sweet and dutiful, the apple of our motherland. It really is surprising what the mother and precisely made up of the bucket jumps by the motherland. In an enterprising woman, she is independent woman, sweet and dutiful, the apple of our motherland. Hey!
Well, next week it's a trip with the Grand Duke into Utopia to try to decide whether or not those last two works in the series really were the failures people usually say they were. Maybe there was, after all, something grand about the Duke, and maybe, after all, Utopia wasn't all that limited.
Benny Green introduced Gilbert and Sullivan with comments from Dr Thomas Heric. Also taking part were Frederick Treeves, Roger Hammond, Margot Boyd, Tony Canal, Nerissa Knights, Ellen McIntosh, Christina Collier and Dennis Gom. The producer was David Raven Allen.